Dyscalculia is difficulty in learning or comprehending arithmetic, such as difficulty in understanding numbers, learning how to manipulate numbers, and learning facts in mathematics. It is generally seen as a specific developmental disorder. Dyscalculia can occur in people from across the whole IQ range, often, but not always, involving difficulties with time, measurement, and spatial reasoning. Estimates of the prevalence of dyscalculia range between 3 and 6% of the population. A quarter of children with dyscalculia have ADHD. Mathematical disabilities can occur as the result of some types of brain injury, in which case the proper term is acalculia, to distinguish it from dyscalculia, which is of innate, genetic or developmental origin. Dyscalculia has been associated with female children who have Turner syndrome, people who suffer from spina bifida, and has also been associated with children who have ADHD. Signs and symptoms. The earliest appearance of dyscalculia is typically a deficit in the ability to know, from a brief glance and without counting, how many objects there are in a small group. Human adults can subbutize 3 or 4 objects. However, children with dyscalculia can subbutize fewer objects and, even when correct, take longer to identify the number than their age-matched peers. Persistence. Although many researchers believe dyscalculia to be a persistent disorder, evidence on the persistence of dyscalculia remains mixed. For instance, in a study done by Mazzocco and Myers, researchers evaluated children on a slew of measures and selected their most consistent measure as their best diagnostic criterion. A stringent 10th percentile cutoff on the TEMA-2. Even with their best criterion, they found dyscalculia diagnoses for children longitudinally did not persist. Only 65% of students who were ever diagnosed over the course of 4 years were diagnosed for at least 2 years. The percentage of children who were diagnosed in 2 consecutive years was further reduced. Other problems. Dyscalculia involves frequent difficulties with everyday arithmetic tasks like the following: difficulty reading analog clocks, difficulty stating which of 2 numbers is larger, inability to comprehend financial planning or budgeting, sometimes even at a basic level, for example, estimating the cost of the items in a shopping basket or balancing a checkbook, difficulty with multiplication tables and subtraction tables, addition tables, division tables, mental arithmetic, etc. Difficulty with conceptualizing time and judging the passing of time, may be chronically late or early. Problems with differentiating between left and right, inability to visualize mentally, difficulty reading musical notation, difficulty with choreographed dance steps, difficulty working backwards in time, difficulty comprehending things relating to occurrences in different time zones, difficulty navigating or mentally turning the map to face the current direction rather than the common north equals top usage, having particular difficulty mentally estimating the measurement of an object or distance away, inability to grasp and remember mathematical concepts, rules, formulae, and sequences, inability to concentrate on mentally intensive tasks, mistaken recollection of names, poor name, face retrieval, may substitute names beginning with same letter. Causes. Both domain general and domain specific causes have been put forth. With respect to pure developmental dyscalculia, domain general causes are unlikely, as they should not impair one's ability in the numerical domain without also affecting other domains such as reading. 2 competing domain-specific hypotheses about the causes of developmental dyscalculia have been proposed: the magnitude representation and the access deficit hypothesis. Magnitude representation deficit (DHRANES) number sense theory suggests that approximate numerosities are automatically ordered in an ascending manner on a mental number line. The mechanism to represent and process non-symbolic magnitude is often known as the approximate number system, and a core deficit in the precision of the ANS, known as the magnitude representation hypothesis, or number module deficit hypothesis, has been proposed as an underlying cause of developmental dyscalculia. In particular, the structural features of the ANS is theoretically supported by a phenomenon called the numerical distance effect, which has been robustly observed in numerical comparison tasks. Typically, developing individuals are less accurate and slower in comparing pairs of numbers closer together than further apart. A related numerical ratio effect, based on the Weber's law, has also been used to further support the structure of the ANS. The numerical ratio effect is observed when individuals are less accurate and slower in comparing pairs of numbers that have a larger ratio than a smaller ratio. A larger numerical distance or ratio effect with comparison of sets of objects is thought to reflect a less precise ANS. And the ANS acuity has been found to correlate with math achievement in typically developing children and also in adults. More importantly, several behavioral studies have found that children with developmental dyscalculia show an attenuated distance ratio effect than typically developing children. Moreover, neuroimaging studies have also provided additional insights even when behavioral difference in distance ratio effect might not be clearly evident. For example, Price and colleagues found that children with developmental dyscalculia showed no differential distance effect on reaction time relative to typically developing children, but they did show a greater effect of distance on response accuracy. In addition, they also found that the right intraparietal sulcus in children with developmental dyscalculia was not modulated to the same extent in response to non-symbolic numerical processing as in typically developing children, with the robust implication of the intraparietal sulcus in magnitude representation. It is possible that children with developmental dyscalculia have a weak magnitude representation in the parietal region. Yet, it does not rule out an impaired ability to access and manipulate numerical quantities from their symbolic representations. Moreover, findings from a cross-sectional study suggest that children with developmental dyscalculia might have a delayed development in their numerical magnitude representation by as much as 5 years. However, the lack of longitudinal studies still leaves the question open as to whether the deficient numerical magnitude representation is a delayed development or impairment. Access deficit hypothesis. Roussella and Knoll propose that dyscalculia is caused by the inability to map pre-existing representations of numerical magnitude onto symbolic Arabic digits. Evidence for this hypothesis is based on research studies that have found that individuals with dyscalculia are proficient on tasks that measure knowledge of non-symbolic numerical magnitude but show an impaired ability to process symbolic representations of number. Neuroimaging studies also report increased activation in the right intraparietal sulcus during tasks that measure symbolic but not non-symbolic processing of numerical magnitude. However, support for the access deficit hypothesis is not consistent across research studies. Diagnosis. At its most basic level, dyscalculia is a learning disability affecting the normal development of arithmetic skills. A consensus has not yet been reached on appropriate diagnostic criteria for dyscalculia. Mathematics is a specific domain that is complex and cumulative. Thus, dyscalculia can be diagnosed using different criteria, and frequently is. This variety in diagnostic criteria leads to variability in identified samples, and thus variability in research findings regarding dyscalculia. Other than using achievement tests as diagnostic criteria, researchers often rely on domain-specific tests and teacher evaluations to create a more comprehensive diagnosis. Alternatively, fMRI research has shown that the brains of the neurotypical kids can be reliably distinguished from the brains of the dyscalculic kids based on the activation in the prefrontal cortex. However, due to the cost and time limitations associated with brain and neural research, these methods will likely not be incorporated into diagnostic criteria despite their effectiveness. Types research on subtypes of dyscalculia has begun without consensus. Preliminary research has focused on comorbid learning disorders as subtyping candidates. The most common comorbidity in individuals with dyscalculia is dyslexia. Most studies done with comorbid samples versus dyscalculic-only samples have shown different mechanisms at work and additive effects of comorbidity, indicating that such subtyping may not be helpful in diagnosing dyscalculia, but there is variability in results at present. Due to high comorbidity with other disabilities such as dyslexia and ADHD, some researchers have suggested the possibility of subtypes of mathematical disabilities with different underlying profiles and causes. Whether a particular subtype is specifically termed dyscalculia as opposed to a more general mathematical learning disability is somewhat under debate in the scientific literature. Semantic memory. This subtype often coexists with reading disabilities such as dyslexia and is characterized by poor representation and retrieval from long-term memory. These processes share a common neural pathway in the left angular gyrus, which has been shown to be selective in arithmetic fact retrieval strategies and symbolic magnitude judgments. This region also shows low functional connectivity with language-related areas during phonological processing in adults with dyslexia. Thus, disruption to the left angular gyrus can cause both reading impairments and difficulties in calculation. This has been observed in individuals with Gerstmann syndrome, of which dyscalculia is one of constellation of symptoms. Procedural concepts. Research by Geary has shown that in addition to increased problems with fact retrieval, children with math disabilities may rely on immature computational strategies. Specifically, children with mathematical disabilities showed poor command of counting strategies unrelated to their ability to retrieve numeric facts. This research notes that it is difficult to discern whether poor conceptual knowledge is indicative of a qualitative deficit in number processing or simply a delay in typical mathematical development. Working memory. Studies have found that children with dyscalculia showed impaired performance on working memory tasks compared to typically developing children. Furthermore, research has shown that children with dyscalculia have weaker activation of the intraparietal sulcus during visuospatial working memory tasks. Brain activity in this region during such tasks has been linked to overall arithmetic performance, indicating that numerical and working memory functions may converge in the intraparietal sulcus. However, working memory problems are confounded with domain general learning difficulties. Thus, these deficits may not be specific to dyscalculia but rather may reflect a greater learning deficit. Dysfunction in prefrontal regions may also lead to deficits in working memory and other executive function, accounting for comorbidity with ADHD. Studies have also shown indications of causes due to congenital or hereditary disorders, but evidence of this is not yet concrete. Treatment. To date, very few interventions have been developed specifically for individuals with dyscalculia. Concrete manipulation activities have been used for decades to train basic number concepts for remediation purposes. This method facilitates the intrinsic relationship between a goal, the learner's action, and the informational feedback on the action. A one-to-one tutoring paradigm designed by Lynn Fuchs and colleagues which teaches concepts in arithmetic, number concepts, counting, and number families using games, flashcards, and manipulables has proven successful in children with generalized math learning difficulties. But intervention has yet to be tested specifically on children with dyscalculia. These methods require specially trained teachers working directly with small groups or individual students. As such, instruction time in the classroom is necessarily limited. For this reason, several research groups have developed computer adaptive training programs designed to target deficits unique to dyscalculic individuals. Software intended to remediate dyscalculia has been developed. While computer adaptive training programs are modeled after one-to-one type interventions, they provide several advantages. Most notably, individuals are able to practice more with a digital intervention than is typically possible with a class or teacher. As with one-to-one interventions, several digital interventions have also proven successful in children with generalized math learning difficulties. Rasanen and colleagues have found that games such as the number race and grapho game math can improve performance on number comparison tasks in children with generalized math learning difficulties. Several digital interventions have been developed for dyscalculics specifically. Each attempts to target basic processes that are associated with math difficulties. Rescue Calcularize is one such computerized intervention that seeks to improve the integrity of an access to the mental number line. Other digital interventions for dyscalculia adapt games, flashcards, and manipulables to function in through technology. While each intervention claims to improve basic numerosity skills, the authors of these interventions do admit that repetition and practice effects may be a factor involved in reported performance gains. An additional criticism is that these digital interventions lack the option to manipulate numerical quantities. While the previous two games provide the correct answer, the individual using the intervention cannot actively determine, through manipulation, what the correct answer should be. Butterworth and colleagues argue that games like the number bonds, which allows an individual to compare different size rods, should be the direction that digital interventions move towards. Such games use manipulation activities to provide intrinsic motivation towards content guided by dyscalculia research. A study used transcranial direct current stimulation to the parietal lobe during numerical learning and demonstrated selective improvement of numerical abilities that was still present 6 months later in typically developing individuals. Improvement were achieved by applying anodal current to the right parietal lobe and cathodal current to the left parietal lobe and contrasting it with the reverse setup. When the same research group used TDCS in a training study with 2 dyscalculic individuals, the reverse setup demonstrated improvement of numerical abilities. Epidemiology. Dyscalculia is thought to be present in 3 to 6% of the general population, but estimates by country and sample vary somewhat. Many studies have found prevalence rates by gender to be equivalent. Those that find gender difference in prevalence rates often find dyscalculia higher in females, but some few studies have found prevalence rates higher in males. History. Mental disabilities specific to mathematics were originally identified in case studies with patients who suffered specific arithmetic disabilities as a result of damage to specific regions of the brain. More commonly, dyscalculia occurs developmentally, as a genetically linked learning disability which affects a person's ability to understand, remember, or manipulate numbers or number facts. The term is often used to refer specifically to the inability to perform arithmetic operations, but it is also defined by some educational professionals and cognitive psychologists such as Stanislas Dehaene and Brian Butterworth as a more fundamental inability to conceptualize numbers as abstract concepts of comparative quantities, which these researchers consider to be a foundational skill, upon which other mathematic abilities build. Symptoms of dyscalculia include the delay of simple counting, inability to memorize simple arithmetic facts such as adding, subtracting, etc. There are very few known symptoms, however, because there has been little research done on the topic. Etymology. The term dyscalculia dates back to at least 1949. Dyscalculia comes from Greek and Latin and means counting badly. The prefix dys comes from Greek and means badly. The root calculia comes from the Latin calculare, which means to count, and which is also related to calculation and calculus.